Okay, so it is the 17th of January 2017, and it's been reported in the last few hours that the astronaut Eugene Cernan has passed away at the age of 82. Eugene Cernan was born in Chicago in 1934 to Czech and Slovak parentage. Um, and he is notable as the last man to have walked on the moon as part of the Apollo 17 mission in December 1972. In total, 12 men walked on the moon, beginning, of course, with Neil Armstrong and ending with Eugene Cernan. Harrison Schmitt was the other astronaut on that mission. And this is just a moment to sort of consider this as a bit of a timeline, because I remember at the time when the World War One veterans were getting older at the end of the 2000s, we were sort of thinking they're really a generation that's getting older now. This is something not exactly comparable, of course, but um, the six surviving Apollo astronauts are all octogenarians now. They're all in their 80s. And as they get older, I think we should remember just what these men done. They were pioneers. And it's not just an incredible feat, but it's the courage it actually took. All of them, with the exception of Neil Armstrong and uh, Schmidt, Harrison Schmitt, were military men. Neil Armstrong and Harrison Schmitt were purely NASA, as I understand it. The others were either from the Navy or other branches of the services. Um, so I don't intend to make this a very long video, but on one hand, let's be grateful that they were representative of that human endeavor, but also, we're now in the latter half of the second decade of the 21st century. And there isn't questions about, well, what happens next? Is there going to be another moon landing in the next 10, 20 years? I think there might be, but I think it's more likely to come from an emerging power like China, because NASA has said they're not going to put major funding into this, partly because of the Great Recession. But I think it will happen. It just might not necessarily be US led. I could definitely see a Chinese astronaut doing that. When I was in China, I remember a Chinese astronaut actually giving a lesson from space, a science lesson to students back in China, which was incredible. Um, there is, of course, moral questions. Should we, as a human species, be looking at space when there's so many problems on Earth? Pollution, war, human rights abuses. The sad reality is these problems have always existed, and I'm not sure if we just put space exploration on hold, we're somehow going to find a cure for ending war in the next 10 years. I'm afraid I'm a little bit cynical in that regard. So rather than hoping for something that is very unlikely, it seems better to focus on those problems, but not to put scientific endeavor on hold. Because scientific endeavor can show the best of human nature. And actually, it can be, I mean, it's true that the space race was about nationalism, it was the US versus the Soviet Union. But I also think space can be about human cooperation. I mean, when the British astronaut Tim Peake went in space last year, he learned Russian. He worked with Russians. Up there, they weren't worrying about what Putin was doing on the ground, or what Washington's response to Putin was, or what the Kremlin's response to Washington was. It was about human beings working together in a mutual situation where they had to rely on each other. So I actually think astronauts in that sense can teach us something. Of course, there's patriotism involved. Of course, it's a bit like the Olympics in that sense. But I think it's more positive than negative. And of course, there's a lot of money. But if it comes to terraforming other planets, if it comes to a colony on, say, Mars, which is the most human-esque planet, I think it's quite exciting. Why shouldn't we as a species be looking forward? Absolutely, we should be focusing on the Earth. We should value the Earth. So it shouldn't be a case of, oh, let's just forget the Earth and terraform another planet because we've made a mess of this one. Definitely not. In fact, I've just watched a video with various astronauts from around the world speaking to the COP21 summit. I think that was the big one in Paris last, well, 2015. Uh, COP 15, I believe, was Copenhagen. COP 21, I believe, was Paris. But I think this is more positive than negative. I think it's something that can inspire all of us. Clearly, all of us are not going to be in that position, but it's a human endeavor and it is inspiring. And so, whilst it's sad that Eugene Cernan has passed away, let's also use it as an opportunity to think and reflect on human achievement and human endeavor. There are currently six of the Apollo astronauts still living, most famous of whom is Buzz Aldrin, of course, who was the second man on the moon. The others are Alan Bain, um, David Scott, Harrison Schmitt, John W. Young, and Charles Duke. So they are the Apollo astronauts who are still living at present. So half of the men who walked on the moon have now passed away. Neil Armstrong, of course, 5 years ago. Edgar Mitchell last year. Another big space pioneer, John Glenn, passed away last year. He didn't walk on the moon, but he was the oldest man in space. So they're all getting to a point now where they're getting on in life, and I think it's just an opportunity for us to reflect. I mean, that's 1972. That's now 45 years since it last happened. I can definitely see it happening again. And there's going to be a whole new generation of astronauts, cosmonauts who are groundbreakers. I mean, they'll never do what Neil Armstrong done, being the first man or first person on the moon. But I think there will be opportunities in the future. You know, we could be looking 2037, the first person on Mars. Who knows? 2047, more likely. Um, okay, so rest in peace, Eugene Cernan. And let's just think about that. Give me feedback. What do you think of this? Should we focus on space? Should we purely focus on Earth? What do you think? Let me know your thoughts.